to another episode of Faithcast. Today I'm here with the brother Steven, who's a reverend at our church here in New Life. I'll let him introduce himself. He's not from Australia, so it's going to be good to hear about somebody who's travelled overseas and now settles and resides in Australia, and how that's impacted on his life as well. So, brother.
Yeah, so look, my name's Steven. I'm from Scotland originally. Lived there most of my life, but I've been living here in Australia now for about 8.5 years. I met my wife, who's Australian, met her in Scotland, but we got married here in Australia, spent some time married in Scotland before here back in Australia, where we've lived, in New South Wales that whole time. We've got a daughter who's 6, and she was also born here in Australia as well.
So just for the people, I just said that you're a reverend. How long have you been an ordained minister?
Yeah, so it was just at the beginning of this year, 2023, that I was ordained. I've actually been in full-time Christian ministry for 22, 23 years. So I went to university, studied to be an engineer, but then went straight into full-time Christian work at a Christian Youth Activity Centre, a place called Teen Ranch. And I was there for 10 years, and it was through Teen Ranch that I met my wife Nicola. I finished up at Teen Ranch and came to Australia. We got engaged and then married. And then after being married, we went back to Scotland. I worked as a pastor for 4 years in a small church in Scotland, and then we came to Australia, where I've been a pastor all that time since as well. But in terms of being officially ordained, while I've been involved in churches, been involved in ministry, it's only been in the last 5-6 years that I was studying, and then got my qualification last year and ordained at the beginning of this year.
Yes. So we'll go right back to the start. So you said you went to be an engineer in university, obviously.
Yeah.
So how did that look like for your first part of your life, from being a young man to then ending up in university with engineering? Yeah,
it was a funny thing. The long and short of doing engineering was that I decided I could work in a chocolate factory. And I loved chocolate, and I was at school. I was good at maths and chemistry and physics, and I was part of a little Christian Bible study group at school. And there was a boy who was older than me, and he was at the point of making decisions about what he was going to select for university. And he mentioned chemical engineering, which I'd never heard of before. Didn't know what it was, but I looked it up, and they said that one of the big industries in chemical engineering was working in food. And I thought, well, that's right up my street. I could work in a chocolate factory. So that was honestly really why I made the decision. And so I went to university in 1996 in Glasgow, which is Scotland's biggest city. It's a city I was born in as well. And then we had moved more rural. Spent 4 years there, got my degree, but as I went through each year, I realised that I didn't have the same interests actually in engineering, and I found it academically really rigorous beyond, in a way, what I felt I was able to manage. So I did come out and had the option then, what am I going to do? Am I going to pursue chemical engineering? There would have been fewer jobs based on how good my qualification was. It wasn't the highest qualification. I still could have done something, but I also at that same time had an opportunity to move into full-time ministry at this place called Teen Ranch. And so that was the step I ended up taking, and 22 years later I haven't looked back in terms of full-time Christian ministry.
That's good. So I know personally that your father was a minister.
Yeah.
So what was it like growing up underneath a minister? So how many siblings have you got as well?
So I've got a little brother and a little sister, and there was 5 of us. Dad was a minister when I was born. He was pretty new, and then we moved from Glasgow, which we were in a housing scheme, really rough area of Glasgow, which there were a lot of issues with drugs and addiction and gangs, which was largely sectarian, so it was based on religion, Catholic Protestant gangs. That was a big part of what went on in Glasgow. And I was very young, didn't really know much of that, but then when I was 7 we moved rural, and Dad became minister of that church. And so Dad was the guy who, when I was in primary school, came and did assemblies in school. Everybody knew my dad. He was the pastor of the town that we lived in. Everybody knew him, and to be honest, Dad was really well liked. He was good at what he did. And I was brought up in a Christian home, went to church, was part of our youth group, but there wasn't a real strong sense of faith, I would say. Saying the nature of Dad's role was that it was a little bit different. It wasn't a real clear evangelical type of church. It was much more a traditional country, people who sat in the same seat that their parents had sat in before them and their grandparents before them. And church was often a very traditional tick the box kind of thing. But yeah.
You remember sort of how big it was?
So the village we lived in was about 3,000 people. Dad's membership, the church membership, was about 900.
That's healthy.
Yeah, but on a Sunday you would have 150 people. So it was very much people thinking, well, I should be a member of the church, because that's just what you do. I want to get my children baptised, so I need to be a member, and I'll maybe come along at Easter, maybe at Christmas, maybe the odd communion service, but no real interest at all in church or Christianity, but just it's the right thing to do. I think people probably saw it as a little bit of fire insurance. You know, if I'm a member of the church, then I can say I'm a Christian, I'm saved, I'll be going to heaven. And it was that kind of fairly basic understanding I think that people had. So that was, I suppose, the background to what I was brought up in. My grandpa was also a minister in the same denomination, which is a Protestant Presbyterian denomination, the Church of Scotland. And so it wasn't unusual for me to be thinking about church and reading the Bible and praying growing up with mum and dad, all that kind of thing. I had an interest myself. And our youth group was healthy. And we ended up, when I was about 11 or 12, going to this camp called Teen Ranch. We went for the weekend. We did horse riding, archery, canoeing, rifle shooting, mountain biking, all the outdoor activities. And it was just like, this place is awesome, this is incredible. And we heard the gospel message presented really clearly. And I still remember our youth leaders, we all came back and we were so excited about what we'd heard and we were talking about it. And they were pulling their hair out, you know, they were like, we've been telling you this for years. You know, like, what's the problem? Why don't you know, why is it only now? And I think the thing was that Teen Ranch just worked. You were out, I think, of your normal comfort zone. You were there were young people who were volunteering, running the kitchen, running the activities, and you were like, no way, these people are cool, they're young, they're like me, but they're Christians. And all of a sudden it all just kind of came together. And so our church went up every year for a weekend, but in school holidays I would go up with a couple of friends by myself just to do the normal Teen Ranch camps for a week. And it was really one of those week camps where you would hear the gospel every day for a whole week, so like 10 talks you heard, that things started to click.
So you sort of think that helps? I mean, you understand it better and more fluidly with a fluid, constant.
I think so, because it felt like it was a little bit of the A to Z almost. We went through creation, mankind made in God's image, and then not wanting to be like God, so separate from God and sin, and then the journey through the cross, and everything just felt good. And I think, as I mentioned, being an engineer, I've got quite a logical, mathematical type brain, and so I think in the end, when I made that decision that I was going to be a Christian, it was, in some sense, quite a logical decision. And I think the real nuts and bolts of it for me were, look, I absolutely believe that God made this work. If God made me, He knows what's best for me. And what He says is, I made you to follow me.
Yes.
To be with me and to be like me. And I thought, well, if God made me, He knows what's best for me, so I should do that. And I think that's still an interesting point in my journey as well, because it was quite logical. It was based on, this is the best way to live. I would have had an understanding of sin and the cross and Jesus coming to pay the price, and that's what allows me to follow Him. But I think it's probably been a journey since that point as a 14, 15-year-old boy to now, 30 years later, really understanding the cross and my sin and my need for a saviour. And by being saved, I can now live that life that I was created to live. So, yes, that was kind of, it was a number of times I've been at Teen Ranch, a number of times I've heard the same message over again, I think until the penny really dropped. And I think until I realised, I actually need to do something about this as well. It's not just a case of, I believe it all.
And that's enough.
I need to confess this, I need to own it, and I need to recognise that it's going to change me.
So then, for that, were you baptised? Were you profess your faith? How did you?
As in the Presbyterian church, you would have infants who are baptised. So my grandpa, in fact, baptised me
yes.
when I was a baby, and so that wasn't really much in my thought as something to do, but really I think I became quite passionate about my faith. Our youth group started going to youth events in Glasgow with lots of other youth groups, and you found yourself kind of fired up in your faith. I then, when I was 15, 16, became a volunteer at Teen Ranch. And so I would go on the weekends, do the dishes, clean the toilets, run activities, help make food, whatever it was. And I think that was when I got a real grasp of the need for other people to hear the gospel and of wanting to be part of that kind of work and ministry. And I think what it does, it also moves you on a little bit in your understanding that it's not just me in my little corner and you and yours, like I've got my faith and I'm over here and you're over there, but I would meet, Scotland's not a big country, but you would go and I would meet Christian people from all over Scotland, and it was fantastic. You had fun, you had a laugh and a carry on, but you were encouraged, and you were encouraged to keep on going in your faith.
I love that same thing, like meeting yourself, someone from the other side of the world that's here now, but because we share that same faith and belief, you just feel like you've known each other for so long, and it's awesome. So that's there, and then for then into Teen Ranch, sort of what did you really enjoy and what did you find sort of difficult with your time at Teen Ranch? Because you were there for a long time, and I know many of stories from there, but I'll let you share just a couple of your main big challenges that you faced there and some real joys that you got out of that as well.
Yeah, so I'd been a volunteer all the way through high school, even at university for those 4 years. I continued to volunteer on weekends or in summer holidays. And then I had moved into a role at Teen Ranch, which was to run the programme, so kind of overall responsible for all the children and staff, running all the activities, doing all the games, that kind of thing. So it was a job of quite high responsibility, and there was someone who did it full time, and they were leaving at the same time I was finishing university. So I was presented with this choice of, do I pursue my engineering or do I go to Teen Ranch? And it was interesting that when I spoke to my parents about it, my dad and my grandpa both kind of were like, I'm not sure Teen Ranch is the right thing. And I think for them is just the reality of ministry and of being full time, and they would have had some different concerns about Teen Ranch anyway. But I think just the reality that full-time Christian ministry is hard and it's demanding on a family and that kind of thing. So in the end, it was a hard choice to decide, but I felt that God was moving me into the ministry. And my parents said, look, okay, maybe for 2 or 3 years, and then see where you go. And look, to be fair, I'd also just finished a 4-year university degree, and they were probably thinking you're going to give that up. And in the end, I stayed for 10 years, and there were a number of difficult conversations with mum and dad along the way where they were saying, well, you've done 3 years, you've done 5 years, so you'll leave now, will you? And more along the way, I just, like I said, had this sense of call that God wants me to be in full-time ministry. And I felt that was a call on my life, and I didn't know what it exactly looked like. And even now, while I'm a pastor and have been for 12 years or so, I would believe that I will always be in full-time Christian ministry, and for whatever reason in the future it may well be that I would move out of pastoral ministry. I don't know why that would happen, but God could do that. But I can't imagine necessarily going into the workplace without that Christian element in it. And so, it was a wrestle to leave the engineering behind and to move into ministry. You live on site with 25 other people, you're living in community. You work 6 days a week, you only have a Monday off, you're meeting thousands of children every year, running camps constantly, kind of no set hours. I started off, in fact on the week that I started, the full-time staff's wages went up from £50 to £55 a week. So you basically double that, that's right, so it went from like $100 to $110 a week. And by the time I finished 10 years later, the wage had moved up incrementally and I was at £70 a week. So $140 a week, so you're not earning much, that's a challenge. There were people during my time who were on full-time staff who left because they felt they just couldn't live on that much. But all that time God was faithful. When I started at Teen Ranch for 10 years, in 4.5 years married in Scotland, into the first 2 years of being in Australia, I had a car, and my wife and I had a car, and not one of those cars did I pay for. You know, like I was earning $100 a week, and yet someone bought me a car, and then an auntie and uncle bought me a car, and then when that car died, they said, well, we need to fix it, so they fixed it, and then when it died, people said, well, we'll give you money to buy a new car, and someone said, I'm selling a car, I can sell you at half price, and someone gave me the money and I bought it at half price, and then, yeah, same for Nikki and I, for those 4.5 years in Scotland, people in the church said, look, your car's not in good shape, we want to give you this money, you're saving up for a house, but you need a new car, so let's give you this money. So it was amazing, I think, actually, when you're living on not much, when you're giving yourself in ministry like that, I think days of real great blessing, days of real joy, seeing God at work. You know, weekend after weekend, week after week, camp after camp, kids would come, and some of them not really knowing maybe what they were coming to, and then they would hear the gospel and they'd be like, oh, okay. And they would open up to it. And some would say that they were making a decision, and then you'd never see them or hear from them again, and you would wonder what really stuck with them. But there were many people, you know, that you would then see them after camp, or as volunteers, and then full-time staff. And
so you're watching them grow.
Yeah. So much good stuff like that, you know. And that's the thing, the reason staff got paid so little is because the camp didn't earn any money. Everything it earned had to spend. But the number of times a check would come in the mail, and all of a sudden that allows us to do something else with the campsite or overseas. Team Rand started camps in France, Romania, Poland, Kenya. I travelled to all these places. And people in these countries would say, we've heard of you, Team Rand, can you start a camp for us here? And God provided. So it was amazing. But yeah, even, you know, I had all these cars. I went on an overseas holiday every year as well. Family friends had a place in Portugal.
Yes.
Sometimes they would just say, you should go, we'll pay your flights. Came to Australia, people paid flights for me to come to Australia. Like, it was just amazing to see God work at that time. But it was hard work, it really was. There were times, I think, you felt quite burnt out. I think the repetitive nature of it, you had to always reset yourself.
Yes.
Yeah, look, I got to the age of 30, a year and a half before I left Teen Ranch, and I was pretty burnt out actually. And
you gave the good years of your life, 20 to 30.
Yeah.
Those are, you know, people's, like you're saying, in the worldly sense, like where I've come from, that's where a lot of people earn big money because they work hard. And so you've worked hard for God. And
that's right. And I was single for the whole of my 20s as well. And then, I said to the people at Teen Ranch, I'm thinking that God might be moving me on at some point. And it was a year and a half later that it actually happened. And it wasn't for bad reasons, it was just a sense that my time has come and actually God might be calling me to something else. There were lots of joys, lots of real challenges. You learn a lot about yourself. You know, living with people, sharing a room with someone, a kitchen, a bathroom every day, whatever it is, you know. You're a family, but you're also not a real family, and so it's a challenge. That was I look back fondly on that, and it no doubt prepared me for what I'm involved with.
Definitely. I see it in you today, you know, the way that you handle things so differently to other people. And now I can sort of understand why when you've come from a background of dealing with difficult people, I'm guessing day in, day out sort of set you up, so that's good. So then Teen Ranch is over, you're in third. So then you came back to Australia?
So I had visited Australia at one point during my time at Teen Ranch. My now wife Nicola had volunteered in Australia at Teen Ranch, and her grandpa was from Scotland, her brother was working in England at the time, so she took a bit of time off work to travel, came to Teen Ranch, and I met her, and nothing happened then. She came back years later, and that was in 2010, and we got together and we had like 5 days together before she went back to Australia, and we had a long distance relationship for like 6 months between Scotland and Australia, using Skype and FaceTime and actual real letters, emails, text messages, whatever, and that was part of, I think, what God was using to move me on from Teen Ranch as well. We entered into the relationship seriously because we weren't wanting to see if this is going to work when you're trying to make it work from Scotland to Australia. So I travelled to Australia, she travelled to Scotland, and then I left Teen Ranch in 2010 and came over to Australia, spent some time with her family and with her. We got engaged in October 2010 and then married in January 2011. So it's been 12, almost 13 years to be married now. And we really were given options in terms of what to do next. I had options from churches and from other camps, but really the difficulty was to get a visa to stay in Australia, so that's why we then made the move and took on a pastoral job in a church in Scotland.
And you stayed there for how long?
So 4.5 years, and it was funny because I think, you know, like at the time with the Queen, we had the same Queen, we're part of the Commonwealth, we speak the same language, you know, my wife's grandfather. You think it's pretty straightforward, if you're going to go anywhere this will be pretty easy. But actually it was really a challenge for my wife. We lived in a little village which was really beautiful, and she got a job in a local flower shop, and she'd had her own floristry business, but it was just very different. And I think, yeah, she had a real sense of homesickness. It was a real challenge in the early days of our marriage. It wasn't easy for her family. She'd lived at home all of her life. So she lived at home, got married. 3 weeks later she left the country and was living in Scotland. So there was all that we went through in the early days of marriage, which was tricky. The church was a great challenge because they'd never had a full-time worker of any sort. They would have said it was unbiblical previously, and then they moved into the possibility of having someone there, and I worked with them. But it was a huge job, and one which I think in a way I felt, at a particular point I thought, I think I can only take this so far. I myself am lacking in training and suitable academic theological qualification to keep on going. I could have stayed longer and would have done some good work, but I think I felt that I need to grow myself and understand more of this.
Because you dealt with mainly teens.
Teenage, that's right.
And now you're making the jump to adults. And like you said, it doesn't sound like much, but no different from going from Australia to Scotland. You think, it is. It's pretty similar, but like you're saying, real challenges start to come because adults have got so much going on. And
just different, that's right. And then in terms of the church, it's a really small church, so you're trying to think, how do you grow a church? And without having ever thought about that. Because even in my 10 years at Teen Ranch, I would go to church on a Sunday night after camp, but I wasn't actively part of a church. We worked every weekend, and so Sunday mornings you had kids and you were looking after them. So I was hearing the gospel, I was hearing good preaching.
Delivering.
But yeah, you were probably given out more than you were really taken in a way. And so, yeah, my understanding of church wasn't really complete or full to really help me do that job long term. So, yeah, we'd always spoken about spending some time in Scotland, some time in Australia. So after those 4.5 years, we made the decision to come back to Australia, believing that there would be good opportunities here for further study, being mentored, working in churches, and so.
So where did you land in Australia?
So we came back. We got a visa, the spouse visa. We came back and we had 2 weeks. So we had to get into Australia to activate the visa. And we had only 2 weeks before we had to go back to Europe for Nicky's brother's wedding. He was getting married in Holland, so it was all a bit muddled. It would have been better not to do it that way, but we came here, and in those 2 weeks, we went to a couple of colleges, Bible colleges, work out if there's options there, and then completely out of the blue, in one of those 2 weeks, got a phone call from someone who said, "You don't know who I am, I know who you are, my name is David, I'm a pastor of a church in a place called Port Stevens, he says, I believe you know my wife Gail." And he said, "Now Gail Mackay, she used to be called." And I said, "Oh yeah." And the first time I'd gone to Teen Ranch, as a volunteer at the age of 15, I had worked with this girl Gail, who was from the north of Scotland, 3 hours away from where I lived in Scotland, and we were in the kitchen doing dishes together all weekend. And so that contact, she had since moved to Australia, she was married, she had 4 kids, she'd been living in Australia for years.
But she must have been keeping tabs on Teen Ranch.
Yeah.
Steven's still there.
So she knew I was moving to Australia, and so David phoned up at the blue and says, "Do you want a job?" And I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "Look, I'm a pastor, I want to take my wife and children to Scotland for a year for a sabbatical, and I need someone to fill the role here. Are you interested?" And so in the end, we went and visited them, spent some time, and we came away, my wife and I thought, it's just a bit too good to be true. Like, I don't think this can happen. Like, we've only been in the country for 2 days. We leave in 2 weeks. And this can't happen. And they said, "Look, if you come, you can work full time or 4 days a week, and you can study. You'll get paid. There's a house that we'll give you to live in." They said, "Because we're going to Scotland, you can have our car. That'll be fully paid for." I thought, I don't think this is a goal. It sounded suspicious, which was remarkable now as I look back at it, because that's exactly what they wanted to do. They said, we want to be really generous to you, because we believe that in doing that, you'll learn in such a way that you might do that. So anyway, we went back to Europe, went to my brother-in-law's wedding, had some time back in Scotland, and then we came back to Australia and we accepted that offer. It was amazing, and it really was as good as they made it sound. You know, I worked 4 days a week and 1 day a week to study. We got paid, they gave us a car, we had a house to live in. And it was a wonderful year. It was a small congregation, a small church, part of this denomination, the Christian Reformed Churches of Australia, which this church is part of. The people were all older. We were the only younger people, the only people really under 30 or 40. But they were really mature, godly, generous, older people who just totally took us under their wing. One of the guys was a retired Presbyterian minister. He became a mentor, really taught me how to preach alongside the studying I was doing, and so it was fantastic. It was great.
So after 10 years of hardship, and then in your 4.5 years, and then God gave you a wonderful holiday in Port Stephens.
Yeah, you know what was amazing? My wife called it. She said it was a soft place to land. It was a really beautiful way of putting it, because it's hard to leave a country and leave family behind, as we'd done when we left Australia to Scotland, and leave Scotland to come to Australia. See, we spent all our money leaving Scotland to get to Australia.
Yes.
We had no job lined up, no training, no nothing, and then 2 days later, it's all conversations sparked that led to that. And so when David came back after a year, we had to decide what to do. Some churches in the denomination were interested,
yes.
but we said, look, we want to stay here, we really love it, we're really at home here. And so we had 9 months more with David there as the pastor and as part of the church. I became an oyster farmer in that area in Port Stephens for 9 months, which I loved. Something totally different, completely different than anything else. And during that time we fell pregnant with our daughter Ailish, because up till that point we had, our whole marriage had been filled with infertility. We'd not been able to have children naturally, and so we had gone through IVF treatment. We had a couple of rounds in Scotland, we did a couple in Australia before we fell pregnant with Ailish. And Tanilba Bay, that little place, Port Stephens, was just a really special place for that to happen. So while we were on the oyster farm, that was when we fell pregnant. Then David left, and I moved back into the ministry from the oyster farm, and we stayed for another 9 months to a year. We got a call from a church in Sutherlandshire, a bigger church, and it felt like it was an appropriate step in my ministry within the church to move on.
And close to start, was that when you started doing your studies, or did you do them up there?
So I had done some studies in Tanilba Bay, all kind of distance learning stuff online, but I had made a start at that point.
And then moved to the Shire?
Yes, I moved to the Shire, I moved to Sutherland.
And how did you go there?
Look, it was very different. Part of it was because being in the Tanilba church, we were the only young people,
Yes.
the only ones with family, with children, and we thought it'd be nice to be part of a larger church for the sake of our daughter. But there was a senior minister there, and it meant I could work only 3 days a week.
Yes.
But I would have the chance to do a bit more study, move towards getting a degree, and maybe give me more opportunities in ministry.
And not far from campus too.
Yeah, that's right, closer to Sydney to be able to study. Lots of reasons that we thought, and being under a senior minister, someone to train you and learn and mentor. So we spent 5 years in the end in Sutherland, during which time I kind of picked up my studies even more and moved towards the Reformed church that we were part of to become a candidate for ministry and become ordained. And so, that was a real formative time as well, growing up with a young baby and a toddler, making new friendships and having friendships with other parents, which I'd never had before, and so that kind of shaped things.
Did you face many challenges there at Sutherland, as well as training, and like you were saying?
Yeah, I think as well it was hard ministry challenges. I think in particular, the Shire's a very middle to upper class kind of area. People were wealthy, people weren't just really walking off the street and coming into church. Quite a traditional church, but reformed in its theology, lots of really committed, mature Christians. And part of the challenge was to think, how do we open the doors maybe a little bit more of the church? How can we get people in? How can we train people, help the church to grow? So it was lots of those kind of questions that we were wrestling with. And then we had COVID as well.
Yes.
So that you saw the difficulty for lots of people during COVID. Who, you know, people, especially in the church, who had illnesses, chronic pain, for whom COVID created a real danger in their life. The split between Christians on how you deal with it and the best way to go ahead. So, and then like even in a place that would seem everybody's wealthy and kind of has it all together,
financially secure,
but they don't. Everybody's still messy. So you're dealing with some hard things in people's lives, disappointment, hurt, pain, struggles. And so we had a lot of that kind of stuff that we learned. And one of the difficulties for me was being part-time in ministry, part-time study. There's always more you can do in ministry. Always more work to do, but you had to limit it because you also had to do your study. So the study was quite hard work alongside the ministry. I think especially on the family, a lot of the nights were spent studying, writing essays, preparing for exams.
For the young daughter.
Exactly, and you're also trying to prepare to preach on Sunday or lead groups of different sorts. So it was a busy time, but again a formative time that shaped me again to now be where we are.
So then how did you transition in from being in the Shire to now where we are here in New Life in Blacktown?
So I've completed my studies, and in our denomination when you finish there's then the opportunity to do an exam for ordination, and I passed. And as a result, it basically means every church in the denomination throughout Australia and Tasmania know of your availability, you're available to be called. And so the church where we were wanted us to stay, and we had 6 or 7 other churches who were interested. And then, I had learned a lot about, I think, how to make that kind of decision. Having already moved countries twice and changed churches a couple of times, there was a bit of a framework there for how we were going to make that decision. But really what it came down to in the end, the decision to come here, my wife's health has not, and is still not all that great. So we had good options in other parts of Australia, but it just felt like it was too far away for her sake, from family, from all the different specialists and doctors that she's had up till now. But really the big part was about my ministry gifts and what I'm passionate about, and how that could best fit with a church. Some of the churches in our denomination have a lot of work that needs to be done. There's a big project to change the culture, to think how the churches can grow, to train people, to get the church known in the community. And I don't really have that experience, especially. And you could learn as you go, but it would be hard work to bring change in culture. So much of that work had already been done here at New Life, and the opportunity to be working as part of a team ministry, with the opportunity to train people seemed to be a good fit. So we took what was a step of faith really over a year ago now. And even today, speaking to some other ministers and younger guys in our denomination who are making the decision we made a year ago, they're making it now. They're thinking about churches that are calling them. And I said this morning, that there's a step of faith. You can't be certain to the best of your knowledge with much prayer and the wisdom God gives you. I think this is the place where God would have us go. But a year on, we really feel settled, and that the decision we made has been affirmed. And how I've been able to be used, what I'm continuing to learn and grow in, and the fruit that we're seeing in the ministry and for the sake of our family as well.
And I've been blessed to be able to be with you in a couple of big things, so we might touch on those. New Life had their first youth camp last year, and then I've been involved with you in men's ministry as well, which has been great to be alongside you. So we'll just touch on the youth in that. So they saw an opportunity with you here to say, where they've been wanting, I know Ken's been wanting to do it for years and years. So how did you sort of see that? How did they approach you? How did you work out that, this is something I can really help with? I saw you preach down there, which was great, because my children are involved in it, and it was just awesome to see how it all really played out and it worked really well. So how do you think it went overall?
It was good. I think, whether it's Teen Ranch or Scripture Union or Crusaders or Youth Works here in Australia, these camp settings they just work somehow. And so this Christian campsite called Wedderburn is or it's linked with our denomination. And there used to be another camp and a conference the youth used to go to, but that didn't work out, and so the option to maybe do something for ourselves was presented, and in the end that's what we went with. And so, with my experience of running these camps, was able to help the leaders consider how do we get this moving, what does it need to look like, how are we going to run it. And so we did 3 talks over the weekend alongside activities. And that's the talks are not different than what our young people would hear week to week, but just that setting of being away from church, away from home, and just with only other youth and youth leaders lends itself to the young people really kind of leaning in and considering it maybe in a different way than they otherwise would. Yes. And so, I was able to stay for the weekend at the camp and speak and just share with them a little bit about where I think some of the challenges for them as young people are, and how we might see God helping them to live out that life that He's called them to.
Yeah, I heard one sermon giving about encouragement and how they don't have to serve so much, but just to show up with their Bibles, taking notes, attentive, alert, and listening at a sermon. It's super. I encourage me, even watching my own children and other people's children. It's like, man, look at this young man or young woman just sitting there so attentive to want to hear God's word and fully embrace what He's trying to teach you through His word. So it was very good to hear that. You talk about that because I didn't get to hear much being in the kitchen, but when I put it was very encouraging to hear. So that's good. And then now, men's ministry, sort of how have you seen that go? Because that's your area of the spiritual maturity of the church, which is a very big area to deal with because you're shepherding over the flock. So how has sort of men's ministry have you seen in the last 12 months?
I think one of the fascinating things is having been involved in a church in Scotland, 2 different churches here in Australia before coming to New Life. Different churches do things in a different way. And so in previous churches, like in Scotland, we had a really pretty decent youth group, but none of the kids who came were involved with church. None of them were Christians. They were all just community kids that somehow we had contact with, and they kept on coming week after week. We would give them a gospel talk. It was fairly brief, 5 minutes maybe. We'd play games, we'd hang out, we'd do stuff with them. I know other churches who've had a youth group that's worked that similar way. So it's interesting here, the youth ministry is part of maturity. So it's got a different focus. So kids from community and non-Christian kids will come, but they're coming to a place where they're going to be taught and they're going to learn the Bible rigorously as the key part of what they do. And that's just very different. Whereas in other places, it can seem like the gospel is more of a tag-on. You're just glad to have kids from the community there. You'd rather they were there than not at all. But so there's been something for me to learn about the youth being that way. But even also the men's ministry. The men's ministry in the same way falls under maturity, like they say, spiritual maturity. So you're trying to grow the men in faith and knowledge and love for the Lord. In order that, in the same way with the youth, in order that, maturing these ones, whether young people or men or women, they then go out to those who are lost, and they bring them in. And so we've seen that, I think, with the men. I think there's been an increased attendance throughout the year and commitment to men's ministry. A spread demographic from the youth, young adult kind of age all the way through to some of the senior men who've been coming along. Trying to set a challenge at each night, something fairly simple and to the point, something for them to do. And I think it's been a good response, and I think they want to come, and that's important. It's not necessarily outreach, but for Christian men to come and be matured so that they're built up to be
It's been good to be a part of the background meetings and how we've challenged one another into biblically what it means to try and build men up and encourage men has been really great, especially for me being fairly new. It's been good to sit around mature men and elders and yourself and just be like, man, like you're saying, I never knew all of that sort of stuff, so it's been great. And I guess before we sort of wrap it up, the last one I sort of want to ask you about your, I watched you preach from the 1st of January when you came for your first sermon to now, and Glenn as well. And just to watch you has been very, very encouraging Because I saw that even last year when you came, the very first time actually, when you came in November, was it last year?
Yeah.
And like, I heard you preach and it was sort of, like I felt I was sort of a little bit timid because you were in the front of new people and you didn't really know, but then I sort of felt, in January I felt there was a little bit of a shift and you were like, right, this is my church and I'm going to preach to you on this, but you have preached on some very tough subjects this year. I loved how you've done God's big picture. Now we're going through the parables, a few psalms we've done, but just even tithing, we've worked there. But the biggest one I think you went over, in a church of what we think as believers, you went over Lord's Supper. And then you challenged us to say, it's not something that we just, like you said, it's not traditional. You don't just take the bread, you don't just drink the wine, because there is a significance. And God's word tells us very clearly to be very, very careful that when you take this, you have to be of His Spirit and be understanding this is for the cross, this is for His beaten and broken body, and this is for the blood that He shed to wash all of our sins away. So how have you sort of, for yourself, what I just explained, how have you sort of in yourself gone, yeah, this is...
I think one of the things, coming to somewhere new, you've got to learn where the people are at. And of course, with a big church, over 300 people, really, everybody's at a different place. But even recently we had a lunch for newcomers, and one of the things is we actually set a fairly high bar for membership. And we want to say, look, if you're thinking you're just going to come every week or every now and again, you're just going to warm the pew, you would say, it's probably not the right church for you. Because actually, I think what I've learned and what we're trying to do as a church and as a staff team driving the church with the leadership, you want to see people move on and progress and grow. You don't want people just to sit there and to mean very little. You don't want them just to think, well, if I just sit here, then that's enough. We believe Jesus says, I have come to give you life. And it says, he who has the Son has life. He who does not have the Son does not have life. And there's abundant life now to be enjoyed with Jesus. There's eternal life to come. And that happens when we truly embrace the relationship with Jesus that we have and we walk with Him. And so we want to love people. We want to see them move on in love for and with Jesus. And so, we set the bar high with people. We want to push them towards knowing Him more. So we don't want people to do something like Lord's Supper and think it doesn't mean anything. It's just, I get something from it. So the baptism does or doesn't matter. Like, we want people to think seriously, and I think there needs to be a strong sense of challenge for people to give people a shake at times, because we can get a bit lethargic, apathetic, stuck in our ways, and we need that little shake.
That's been great, it's been awesome, it's been very encouraging to see that. Now, again, you're writing up our studies for life group, which I'm a leader of. How have you sort of found that, and then you've gone to sit in with life groups in your life, so sort of how do you see that's basically sort of the blood flow of the church, where you're going around to visit the leaders and stuff like that? How are you finding?
Like even this week I've visited a couple, and one with the seniors and one with just one of the other midweek groups, and you can see a sense of community amongst a smaller group of people, which is necessary in a large church. And as one of two pastors, even though you've got a staff team and a team of elders, you can't manage everybody, you can't pastorally care yourself for everybody. So life groups really give that opportunity to have that happen. And for me to go and try and observe leaders and then see them, but also see how people interact with one another, get a bit of a gauge when you hear people answering questions based on things that they've heard preached. Helps you understand maybe where the sermons have landed, maybe where there's gaps, the things that people need to hear. So as we plan for next year, trying to think, okay, I think there's a few common themes coming out, maybe we need to move in this direction with that kind of thing. So I think our life groups are a huge part of healthy church life, and for those again who would seek to join the church, we really want to encourage them there. It allows us to look after them. It's doing that thing over and above just a Sunday for an hour, helps them grow, helps them they trust in their walk with Jesus, build relationships in the church, have a sense of belonging. All really important things within the life of the church.
So then what's been, we'll just go with one sort of struggle in your first sort of 12 months here, and one real joy that you've gotten as a family as well?
I think they almost go maybe hand in hand. In a new place, it's been such a joy just to really feel like you fit, and your gifts are being used, and you're being challenged and stretched, and then you really enjoy the ministry. There's been times, as we've explained in the video, like ministry's been a struggle, it's been hard work, you felt burnt out by it, or you're really stretched so much, whether it's study and work or whatever it is. And this, well, for a long number of years now, my wife's health has not been great. It's continued to be that way this year. More significant struggles in the last few months, but despite that, we still feel really settled. And I don't feel a sense of burnout, or I can't manage this ministry because I have to also look after my family. There's a sense of being loved and cared for as part of a team, and I'm actually energized by the ministry. You know, I think that's an amazing thing, because I have a burden of care for the family, to look after them in a particular way at the moment that's necessary, but it doesn't stop me doing what I need to do for ministry, and it doesn't make me negative towards the ministry or that kind of thing. I actually get energized by it, and it helps me overall. So I think, yeah, those two things kind of hand in hand at the end of the year. Really lovely to reflect on.
That's awesome. Well, brother, thank you so much for your time. Like I said to people, I love having Steven on here because, like I've said, I want people to comment and encourage you to ask questions. We're going to catch up with Steven again later on down the track, so if you have any questions for him, I'm sure he'll be happy to answer any. Thank you so much, brother. Awesome.